The night Alexander Prescott died, the mansion recorded 3 different confessions. Not 1, not 2, 3. Each one was delivered in the same voice, his voice, but each told a completely different story. The first confession, discovered by his eldest son, Damien, in the study's hidden safe, claimed that Alexander had been murdered by his own wife, Eleanor, who had poisoned his whiskey over a period of 6 months. The second confession, found by his daughter, Victoria, tucked inside a hollowed-out book in the library, claimed that his youngest son, Julian, had strangled him in a fit of rage after being cut from the will. The third confession, unearthed by Julian himself beneath a loose floorboard in the master bedroom, claimed that Alexander had faked his own death and was still alive, watching them all from the shadows. 3 recordings, 3 accusations, 3 completely incompatible realities. The Prescott family had always been a fortress of secrets, but this was something else entirely. This was a labyrinth designed by a dead man who had spent his final years cultivating paranoia like a rare orchid. Alexander Prescott had been a media mogul, a man who controlled narratives for a living. He had built an empire on the manipulation of truth, and now, from beyond the grave, he was orchestrating the most elaborate psychological experiment of his career, using his own children as subjects. The siblings gathered in the mansion's grand hall, each clutching their respective recording, each staring at the others with a mixture of suspicion and dread. Damien, the eldest, was a cold-eyed corporate raider who had inherited his father's ruthlessness, but none of his charm. Victoria was a diplomat, smooth-tongued and unreadable, a woman who had spent her life negotiating with enemies. Julian was the youngest, a failed artist with a temper and a drinking problem that had cost him every opportunity his father had ever given him. They stood in a triangle, each one holding a piece of a puzzle that didn't fit together. "My recording is real," Damien said, his voice flat and certain. "Father told me before he died that Mother was poisoning him. He asked me to protect the recording." Victoria laughed, a hollow, bitter sound. "Your recording is a fabrication. Father told me Julian was unstable. He said Julian had threatened him. He gave me that recording to protect the family." Julian's face was pale, his hands trembling as he held up his own device. "And my recording says Father is still alive, which means one of you is lying, or both of you, or all of us are being played." The truth was about to unravel in ways none of them could have predicted. The siblings decided to hire an independent forensic analyst to verify the recordings. The analyst, a retired FBI agent named Margaret Holloway, had a reputation for uncovering the truth in cases that had baffled everyone else. She spent 3 days in the mansion, examining the recordings, the equipment, the timestamps, the vocal patterns. When she finally presented her findings, her face was grim. "All 3 recordings are authentic," she said. "They were all made by Alexander Prescott's voice. They were all recorded within 24 hours of his death, and they all contain information that only he could have known." The room went silent. Damien leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "That's impossible. They contradict each other." "That's what makes this fascinating," Holloway replied. "Your father didn't make a mistake. He created 3 versions of the truth deliberately. He knew only one recording could be correct, but he also knew that each of you would find only the one meant for you. He designed this to force you to confront each other. The question is, why?" Victoria's voice was cold. "He wanted to destroy us. He always did. He loved chaos. He loved watching us tear each other apart." Julian shook his head. No, he wasn't cruel. He was calculating. He wanted to test us. He wanted to see which one of us would survive the truth. Holloway looked at each of them in turn. There's more. The recordings are connected. Each one contains a fragment of a larger message. When combined, they reveal a single instruction, but I couldn't decode it. I need all 3 recordings to complete the message, and I need all 3 of you to work together. The siblings exchanged glances. They had spent their entire lives competing for their father's approval, sabotaging each other, betraying each other. Working together was not in their nature, but the stakes were too high to ignore. They agreed to combine their recordings to decode the message together. It was the first time in decades that they had cooperated on anything.
The decoding process took another 2 days. Holloway worked tirelessly, cross-referencing the recordings, isolating the hidden frequencies, piecing together the fragments. When she finally finished, the message was clear. The truth is not in the recordings. The truth is in the basement. Look beneath the floorboard of the old wine cellar. There you will find the real confession and the real killer. The siblings descended into the basement together, their footsteps echoing through the damp, musty corridors. The wine cellar had been sealed for years, ever since their mother had died. It was a place of childhood memories and adult regrets, a space that had been locked away and forgotten. They found the loose floorboard exactly where the message had indicated. Beneath it was a metal box, rusted and ancient. Inside the box was a single item, a diary. Not Alexander's diary, their mother's diary. Eleanor Prescott had been a quiet, unassuming woman, a former actress who had given up her career to marry a media tycoon. She had been the invisible presence in the Prescott household, the one who kept the peace, the one who smoothed over the cracks in the family's fragile facade. But her diary revealed a different story. She had been the mastermind behind the family's rise to power. She had manipulated Alexander, orchestrated his business deals, eliminated his rivals. And she had been the one who had finally decided to end his reign. The diary contained a detailed confession written in her own hand, describing how she had poisoned Alexander's whiskey over a period of months. She had done it not out of hatred, but out of love. He had become a monster, a tyrant who was destroying everything they had built together. She had killed him to save the family from his worst impulses. But there was a twist. Alexander had known. He had discovered her plan months before his death, and instead of stopping her, he had decided to use her confession as the foundation for his final experiment. He had created the 3 recordings as a distraction, a way to keep his children occupied while the real truth remained hidden. He had wanted them to discover the diary. He had wanted them to understand that their mother was the killer, and he had wanted them to decide what to do with that knowledge.
The siblings stared at the diary, their minds reeling. Their mother, the gentle, loving figure who had raised them, had been a murderer. And their father, the tyrant they had hated, had been a victim who had turned his own death into a game. "This changes everything," Victoria whispered. "Mother was the killer. Father knew. He let her do it." Damien's voice was sharp. "He didn't just let her, he orchestrated it. He created the recordings to manipulate us. He wanted us to find this diary. He wanted us to blame her." Julian's eyes were wide, his face pale. But why? Why would he do that? The answer came from the diary's final entry. Eleanor had written it the night before she died, a confession within a confession. She had not killed Alexander. She had planned to. She had prepared the poison, but she had never administered it. Someone else had done it for her. Someone who had been watching her, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. That someone was the family's trusted butler, a man named Reginald, who had served the Prescotts for 40 years. Reginald had been in love with Eleanor for decades. He had seen her suffer under Alexander's cruelty. He had watched her plan the murder, and he had decided to execute it himself. He had poisoned Alexander's whiskey, not to protect Eleanor, but to frame her. He had wanted to destroy the family from within, to tear apart the empire that had stolen the woman he loved. The diary ended with a single line. Reginald is the killer. He is also my lover, and he is the father of my youngest child. Julian looked up from the diary, his face ashen. Reginald is my father. The truth hit them like a physical blow. The man they had trusted, the man who had served their family for a lifetime, had been their mother's secret lover. He had murdered Alexander Prescott to protect her, and in doing so, he had created a legacy of lies that spanned generations. Reginald was still alive. He had retired years ago, living in a small cottage on the outskirts of the estate. The siblings confronted him together, their anger and confusion boiling over. Reginald looked old now, his face weathered, his hands trembling, but his eyes were still sharp, still calculating. "You found the diary," he said quietly. "I was wondering when you would." Damien stepped forward, his fists clenched. "You killed our father. You framed our mother. You destroyed this family." Reginald shook his head. "I didn't destroy it. I saved it. Your father was a monster. He was going to destroy everything, the company, the family, the legacy. He was going to burn it all down because he couldn't stand the thought of anyone else having it. I did what I had to do to protect your mother, and I did what I had to do to protect all of you." Victoria's voice was icy. "Protect us? You framed Mother. You made her look like a murderer." "I framed her to protect her from the truth. She didn't kill Alexander, but she would have. She was planning it. She had the poison ready. I took the burden from her. I became the killer so she wouldn't have to live with that guilt. And I made sure the evidence pointed to her, not to frame her, but to give her an alibi. The diary was my backup plan. If anyone ever found out the truth, the diary would reveal that I was the killer, and it would also reveal that Julian is my son." Julian's voice cracked. "Why didn't you tell me? All these years I thought I was his son. I thought I was a Prescott. But I'm not. I'm a butler's bastard." Reginald's eyes filled with tears. "I wanted to tell you. I wanted to claim you. But your mother begged me not to. She said it would destroy you. She said you were too fragile, too sensitive. She wanted you to believe you were a Prescott, to have the life she never could." The siblings were silent, processing the weight of the revelation. Their entire lives had been built on a foundation of lies. Their father, their mother, their trusted servant, all of them had been actors in a tragedy that none of them had fully understood.
The truth finally emerged from the chaos. Alexander Prescott had known about Reginald's affair. He had known about Julian's true parentage. He had known about Eleanor's plan to poison him. And he had used all of it to design his final revenge. He had created the 3 recordings to set his children against each other, to force them to uncover the truth, to make them suffer the way he had suffered. He had wanted them to know that they were all products of betrayal. He had wanted them to understand that the Prescott legacy was a lie. And he had wanted them to destroy each other in the process. But Reginald had been one step ahead. He had planted the diary as a countermeasure, a way to reveal the truth on his own terms. He had known that Alexander would try to manipulate his children from beyond the grave, and he had prepared his own version of events, one that would expose Alexander's cruelty while protecting Eleanor's memory. In the end, the siblings were left with a choice: continue their father's war, or break the cycle and build something new. Damien chose revenge. He exposed Reginald to the authorities, ensuring that the butler would spend his final years in prison. Victoria chose silence. She buried the diary, destroyed the recordings, and walked away from the family forever. Julian chose redemption. He accepted his true parentage, forgave his mother, and left the Prescott Empire to pursue a life of art and simplicity. The 3 versions of the death had served their purpose. They had revealed the truth, shattered the family, and forced each sibling to confront their own demons. But the real legacy of Alexander Prescott was not the fortune or the empire or the recordings. It was the lesson that truth is not a single thing. It is a weapon, and it can destroy you if you hold it too tightly.
Years later, the Prescott mansion stood empty, its halls silent, its secrets buried. The family had scattered to the winds, each sibling carrying their own version of the truth. Damien died wealthy but alone, his empire built on the ashes of his family. Victoria became a recluse, her diplomatic career destroyed by the scandal. Julian found peace in a small coastal town, painting seascapes that no one would ever buy. And Reginald, the butler who had loved too deeply and killed too desperately, died in prison, his final words a whispered confession. I did it for love, and love, in the end, is the only truth that matters. The 3 recordings were destroyed. The diary was lost. The truth, whatever it was, faded into myth. But the story of the Prescott family lived on, a cautionary tale about the cost of secrets, the weight of lies, and the terrifying power of a dead man's revenge. Alexander Prescott had won, not in life, but in death. He had torn his family apart from beyond the grave, proving that the most dangerous weapon in the world is not money or power, it is information. And information, as he had always known, is the only inheritance that truly matters. The 3 versions of the same death were never about who killed him, they were about who would survive the truth. And in the end, the only survivor was the lie they had all told themselves, that they had ever been a family at all. The revenge was complete, the truth was revealed, and the silence that followed was the most terrifying confession of all.